we continue to be gaslit now about our symptoms. It has done this amazing thing, but the time has come to ask questions, I think.
So, Kate, welcome to Audible. We're here to talk about your book, which is all about the pill, but it's more than that. It's all about contraception. It's got hormones in there. It's a really broad spread. You write that abortion rates are going up and that pill usage is going down. So does that show that women are waking up to how bad the pill really is, that they're willing to take this risk, or is there something else going on there?
Well, one thing is that women have discovered the side effects. And we also made a big documentary where we did a big poll on the side effects. And 36% of women had come off the pill because of mental health problems, low mood, anxiety, depression, generally feeling odd. And then there's what's going on is the sort of TikTok consulting room. So people are kind of going to TikTok. They trust TikTok for telling them the best retinol cream for their face. They trust certain influencers. And if those influencers say, it's time to try natural cycles. Why don't you give up having synthetic hormones in your body? This is why you won't get pregnant, probably. And, you know, there's that going on. And then women have just been misinformed and I think gaslit about these symptoms. And so I think the combination of all those things is sending women, you know, into having abortions. And that's absolutely fine. But it's not a great form of contraception. And the abortion pill is available, you know, and 80% of, you know, abortions are with the abortion pill in the UK. But, you know, that's not what we want to go about doing. We want a better form of contraception for women and for men.
And you mentioned TikTok there and the natural cycles. So let's start with TikTok. Why do you think that the information sharing there is so broad, and how much would you say is actually useful versus how much is misinformation?
As far as I know from studies, it looks like 1 in 5 are absolutely wrong.
Okay.
So, you know, people saying this, you know, the pill will make you infertile. You must come off it. You know, there's all that sort of stuff going on. And obviously on TikTok, and I've gone on TikTok myself doing pill scandal recently, you've got 30 seconds or 20 seconds to explain a complex medical situation, which is really subtle and different for every individual. And the very idea that you say, fantastic, natural cycles is marvellous, it just doesn't explain it enough. And we somehow have to get the truth and the science into TikTok. And I don't know how we're going to do that, but hopefully this book will begin a big movement of women actually knowing the truth about contraception and understanding it and maybe being able to talk about it more.
There's one part in the book where you talk about data sharing. So what do people need to know about fertility awareness apps and their data?
Well, some of them are very safe. I think Clue in particular, because it's European-based, has got quite strict laws around what it does with its data and indeed uses some of its anonymised data for good to analyse what's happening to women and for science. Flow got into a lot of trouble for sharing the data a few years ago. And I think it's all a bit of a risk. And certainly in America, women are terrified if they're Googling something around, you know, abortion or trying to find out something that, you know, the authorities could be following what they're doing, you know, if they were trying to get an abortion pill out of state or something like that. It really is a risk. So I think you've got to be careful how much you give away. And I found going into Flow myself, I went in and had a go at playing it being, you know, a younger version of myself. And they really wanted all my data and access to everything on my phone. And I kind of wondered jokingly whether they were, you know, they'd be tracking your periods and you would suddenly get advertisements on your phone, you know, for huge piles of ice cream just at the moment, or large packets of biscuits just before your period, you know, or they try to sell you, you know, weepy romantic movies just before your period. You know, I mean, who knows? But you've got to suspect the worst, I think.
Yeah.
But I also think at the same time, I think also these apps are fantastic because I love the idea of, you know, a schoolgirl, age 12, being able to go on for the first time when she gets her period and start tracking it and know when her period is going to come and know when she might be a bit moody or whatever. And, you know, we never had those tools. And I think it makes people feel safer. And, it really would be brilliant if we could educate the youngest women, because 64% of pill users go on it at school. And I just think, oh my God, what did I know at school?
Yeah.
Nothing. And, what do they know about the different kinds of pill and things like that? We are really not being looked after.
And with the different types of pill, there are so many different types of pill. How different are the different pills?
Really different. Some of them are androgenic, so they come from testosterone. They're a testosterone-like synthetic progestin in the pill. And then some of them are estrogenic, so, that's more female hormone. But one of the worries with some of these pills, and that really interested me, was that the pills, because they lower your hormones, they lower your levels of free testosterone. And, testosterone is a female hormone too, which we shout a lot about in the book. And they lower your levels of what's called sex hormone binding globulin. Now, we should all know those words. They are very, very important to us as women and our partners. They really, really matter. And when sex hormone binding globulin goes down, your testosterone is handcuffed, basically. It's not getting around your body. And 21% of women say they have lowered libido on the pill and on other forms of hormonal contraception. And I think, that is not a conversation that a fifth of us are finding our sex lives are a bit crap on the pill. Why isn't that a big conversation? Why are we told, oh, don't worry, it's not very important? No one has looked at this from kind of above in an almost philosophical, political kind of way, as well as a medical way, and gone, oh my God, what bits of the truth are there that we have not been told? And that's what I felt the whole way through the book. I would just unearth something and go, oh my God, I have to tell everyone this.
Yeah. With libido, obviously there are a lot of women who experience that decline. Are there some women on some pills that experience an increase?
There are some pills that seem to have a progestin in them that doesn't affect your sex hormone binding globulin. So quite a lot of women find that's great, and there's one called Nomac and drospirenone, and there's also a new generation of pills that has come out, and they are made with natural estrogen, because and I suppose I should make this clear that the pills do not have natural hormones in them. Pills have synthetic hormones, and it's, ethanol, estradiol, and progestin that's what you get in the average combined pill. But in the newer generation of pills, which are called Zoele, Drovelis, and Clara, they have natural estrogen in them, which is a body-identical copy of your own hormone. And they're quite hard to get, certainly here in Britain, on the NHS, because they're more expensive and we don't want to give them out. But very interestingly, there's been quite a few studies, particularly in Australia, of women with PMDD, and, PMS. And it seems to be that the natural estrogen is better for mood, and that it keeps your hormones nice and steady, which you want. And the natural estrogen seemed to make about 65% of people said it made them less depressed and less sort of run down before their period. So, there's also this stuff that pills can be good. How can we use them? What are the best pills? Which are the ones that will help us with our mood at the same time, or will help with libido? Yeah,
definitely. When I read that there were pills with body-identical estrogens and that everything else that I'd had previously was synthetic, my mind was blown a little bit. And you've written a lot about the menopause as well, and that you say that you yourself take body-identical estrogen and body-identical progesterone. So where are we at in terms of getting a fully kind of body-identical hormone contraceptive pill?
Not there yet. And why not, is my question. So I interviewed one of the scientists at Theramex. It's actually quite a good sort of women-led pharma company. And they said, we cannot yet make the progesterone effective enough but we can make the body identical estrogen. And the progestin is the not great thing about the pill. The progestin is the thing to be worrying about in terms of sort of breast cancer and things like that. The progestin seems to be the thing that affects mood more than anything else. So it is really worth waiting for that to change. And, I've had this weird chance to look at the pill through menopause glasses and hormone glasses because, at the time I hit menopause, the body-identical HRT hormone replacement therapy became available. And it is fantastic because it is a copy of your own hormones. So the only thing that's happening is you're topping your hormones back to your kind of 40-year-old level, and you feel great. And of course, you have the same hormones every day. And so you wake up and you're like, I used to be a clapped out banger. My hormones were all over the shop, kept breaking down. I am now a Tesla. I'm completely calm every day. And I know what I'm going to do and I'm going to get on with it. And I was thinking, why can't younger women on the pill have what I have? And it's cheap as chips. Natural hormones, you can't patent them. They're a product of nature.
Yeah. And of course, a lot of women aren't taking the pill for contraception. We mentioned that young girls, teenagers, are starting on the pill, and that can be for really heavy periods, acne, those sorts of reasons. So with taking the pill at that age, do we know what that does to a developing brain?
We are just learning what is happening to the brain on the pill, or indeed on any hormonal contraception, be it the implant or patch or whatever, or injection. But the androgenic pills, which are more male in a certain way, tend to make you more kind of spatially aware. But the estrogenic pills tend to make more women better at recognizing faces and the sort of emotional female side. So they emphasize to a tiny degree the masculine or feminine sort of sides of our brain in those traditional kind of terms. And the other interesting thing was there was a study out of Denmark that looked at the serotonin in the brain, the happy hormone in the brain. And basically women who had gone on the pill had about 10% less. It was functioning 10% lower, their serotonin. Which is fine if you're feeling okay, but what if you're a little bit depressed and that just kicks you over the edge into another place? So I'm really kind of worried about what happens to teenagers in this whole story. And I think particularly what happens to teenage brains when instead of giving them, an estrogen creative high every month as they would get on, being on their natural cycle, and you get that kind of amazing oomph in the middle of the month, you suddenly just get this flat line and the hormones are just lower than they would be, or you're not ovulating at all. And, so they're in a kind of, not quite menopause, but a little mini menopause with little low hormones when they're very young. And it's all right, but it's nobody has cared enough to ask what this means. Everybody goes, but 90% of people do great on the pill, or do great on the coil, or do great on this. And but the 10% might be you. And the 10% were my daughter, Molly. And, she got quite depressed on the pill. There was other things in her life going on. But when she came off the pill, she felt so much better, and we didn't spot it at home in lockdown. We just thought it was lockdown. And then she really cheered up when her pill prescription ran out. We both started investigating what was going on with the pill and mental health, and we looked into these big Swedish and Scandinavian studies, which are really superb as to what is going on, with depression and changes on the pill.
I remember my second year of university, I was on the pill for irregular and heavy periods, and I was inconsolable for the whole year.
Aww.
I remember there were times where there'd be social events and housemates would have to persuade me to leave the house. Came off the pill, third year, felt great. And what I think is interesting is health professionals recommend 3 months to try a pill. Then if that's not working, try another pill. And it only takes trying 4 pills to have lost a year if all 4 happen to not work for you. So what do you think of that advice and that kind of time frame?
I'm not a doctor, so I'm looking at this from a much wider sort of scientific point of view. But I would say you know much more quickly than that what the pill is doing to you. And my great thing, which I've said to a lot of people, even like you, that I've just met talking to them, I've said, what about taking a pill holiday for a month and see what happens? You can use a condom a few times. It will be fine, And they take a pill holiday and they go, oh my God. So that was what that was doing to me. And, it's not going to do you any harm to come off it and then go back on it. It's not going to kill you. And it's really worth knowing who the you is and not the kind of synthetic hormonal you.
Yeah. And we know that there's racism within healthcare. And so much of this does come down to having to advocate so much for yourself and whether you're listened to and believed. So do black women have a worse experience of the side effects and the big risks on the pill?
Well, there's a history of the injection, the Depo-Provera injection, being really, really heavily used on certain populations. And when I was looking into, and it's the hormonal injection, when I was looking into what it was doing in America in some studies, I would find that 80% or 70% of the users in that study would be black. And it was very much, inject people and send them off for a good few months and they're not going to cause any trouble. And so that is really worrying, that you might be getting the worst option because of the racism of your and the assumptions of your medical professional. And I was talking to Neelam Hira Shergill, who runs a group called Sisters in Birmingham here. And again, she was talking about South Asian women in her community being really embarrassed to go into their doctor who knows their whole family and not wanting to be seen to be having the pill. And if they wanted the pill for, heavy periods or acne or whatever it was seen as a sexual thing by their community. And that was a real kind of internal problem for people in the community, that the pill was seen as, you are promiscuous. And in fact, you want it for something else. And it's fair enough also if you're promiscuous too. But, the idea that there was this shame around it when people needed it in a medically necessary way. So there's that. But I mean, I think that the bit of research that sent me absolutely screaming off the wall in the whole book was actually the history. Oh my God. And we were talking about black women, and indeed it was some black women, Puerto Rican women, who were given the first doses of the pill. And there were 200, and we're talking back in 1956, and 256 women in Puerto Rico, in the slums basically, are given this pill, which is 10 times the level of hormones of the pills we now have. So it's a killer pill, it's a sledgehammer. And 3 of those women die. And we don't know why they died, because they died of unknown causes. And these are young women who suddenly disappeared, And then a quarter of the women on this trial leave because of nausea, dizziness and headaches, which are often the precursors to strokes, right? And we are giving this hormone at this level, and we know at much, much lower levels it caused clots and strokes in women. But guess what? The survivors were the only people counted when they took the study to the Food and Drug Administration in America and said, none of these women have got pregnant. Isn't it marvelous? And that was what happened. And so basically the people who suffered were left by the wayside. And you think about these Puerto Rican women, they died for us to have sex, literally. It is really disturbing piece of history that we haven't thought enough about. And, that constantly went on. Those early women were gaslit. They weren't told anything about the risks and side effects of what they were getting, and nobody knew. And then, we continue to be gaslit now about our symptoms and what happens around this. And it's, it has so liberated us and let us be in education and be in jobs. And, it has done this amazing thing. But the time has come to ask questions, I think.
Yeah. And there's one bit of misinformation about the pill, which I personally, I think I had retained. So So tell me what the Pope has to do with the idea that we have to have a withdrawal bleed, that we have to have a break from our pill packet and have a bleed.
I love this bit. I mean, it's so annoying when you think about, in fact, I wrote in the book about my worst period. I mean, everybody has their most embarrassing period. And mine was at university when I was a member of the kind of Students' Representative Council. I had to go and sit on the university senate with all these old professors in gowns. And I'd elected to wear a white circular skirt that day and a black leather jacket. And as I got up from this big meeting with all these stuffy academics, I've been representing the students, the old guy next to me poked me and he said, "I think you've got a stain on your skirt, dear." And I looked around, I had this huge red saucer on the back of my white skirt, just the worst period. And I was just so ashamed.
Yeah.
And, we've all had one of those on a white sofa or something like that, haven't we? But, that when I sort of thought about that, and then I went back to the history of the pill, and we found out that Dr. John Rock, who was basically one of the inventors of the pill, was a Catholic and was very keen that the Pope should consider it to be part of the rhythm method, which was allowed by the Catholic Church. And he thought if it looked natural and if women had a week's break off the pill every month, then it would look rather similar to the rhythm method. And but they knew already that you didn't need a break at all, and it didn't cause you to explode or anything like that. The only reason you would bleed is because the hormones weren't there, and you would bleed because the hormones were withdrawn. But actually, you can go on, without having a period at all for, 15 years if you want. And the other thing I learned in the book was that the best withdrawal period is not a week, it's like 4 days or 2 days. Because if you want to have a bleed, which some people do, then a really short one is fantastic because it doesn't get your ovulation coming up again. And, if you forget your pill on day 8 after you've had a 7-day break, chance you could get pregnant then because you're running into kind of the fertile period. Whereas if you've only got a 4 or a 2-day break, it's much better. So the textbooks were sort of advocating years ago, 84 days on, 4 days off. Doctors, no idea, had they? They just don't, we did not get that information. And then we did this poll for the Pill Revolution documentary I made for Channel 4, and we discovered that 48% of women on the combined pill thought they had to take a break. So half of us were taking a break and having that big red stain on their white skirt and having a miserable time if they didn't want to have periods. And nobody's told us that, but we knew in the early 1960, before that even. So we've known for over 60 years. And we have just, been using truckloads of Tampax for years and years. And I think that's, wow,
yeah.
What a disservice to women.
And so where are we at with male forms of contraception?
Well, this is fun. And also, I feel they're getting really good stuff. Like the progestin they are getting is a new progestin called nesterone, which is much better than looks better for things like, libido, guess what, than the ones we've been using. And we may get that one ourselves too in a vaginal ring. But anyway, the nesterone is in a trial called the NST trial, which is nesterone, progesterone and testosterone together in a gel. So and men rub it on their shoulders morning and night, a little blob of gel, just looks like hair gel.
Any particular reason it's the shoulders?
I think you can rub it anywhere. I think that's just where they tested it.
Got it.
But anyway, it brings your sperm count down from millions to zero, almost zero. And the testosterone basically keeps your free testosterone going. So in the male pill, they've thought through the idea about libido in a way that for the female pill, they have not. So they're compensating for the low testosterone created by the progestin in the kind of testicles, but they're making sure your free testosterone around your body is still going kind of gangbusters. And it's been really successful. They've tried it in, South Africa, America, here. They've been doing trials in Edinburgh and Manchester. And men seem to be absolutely fine. The results are not out, but really low side effects, if none. And also men love taking responsibility in a couple for that. If their girlfriend's been struggling on the coil or something like that, it really is nice to say, right, well, I'll take that burden. And, I'll remember to put the gel on every day. You've got to trust one another, though, for that, haven't you? But the other forms of male contraception, the big one coming out is the temporary gel vasectomy, which is in America called either Adam or Plan A, because the morning after pill is called Plan B in America. So anyway, Plan A is to inject into your vas deferens a little blob of Vasol gel, which is a bit like super glue, and it basically puts a little sieve in your tubes that stops the sperm coming through. And then 2 years later, say, when you decide you want to have a baby or whatever, you get another injection, which is of something, it's a bit like bicarbonate of soda, and it just melts away the little sieve that's in your tubes. And then a week later, you are back to normal, and you will be fertile. And it's done really well in big trials in India, and they've done rather well on a lot of happy, monkeys in America, and who had to have a lot of sex. And then it's about to be tried on people in America. One of my favourites is called the COSO, COSO. And it's the little bath for your testicles. It looks like sort of two mugs joined together. It looks like something made by Apple or something. I mean, you put your testicles in this little bath, like a little jacuzzi, and you switch it on, and warms them up. And I don't know, doesn't quite know what it does to them for a while, but when they come out, they're infertile for about a few months. And it sort of discombobulates the sperm. So I mean, if people want to do that, they can do that. But, it's non-hormonal, it's reversible. It's a lot of the options we never had. But in Sweden, I interviewed this lovely guy, and he had a girlfriend who'd had a terrible time with contraception and decided to invent something new. And he's invented a cervical gel that you rub on 5 minutes before you have sex on your cervix. And it basically rebuffs all sperm. And it's been very successful in sheep. They've tested it in sheep, and with Randy Rams. And, the process has been tested, and they are now about to test that in humans in America. But that would be great. 5 minutes before you have sex. You've got to have 5 minutes foreplay, everybody. And, you can put the gel on your cervix. Brilliant.
Yeah.
So simple.
Yeah.
And it looks to be very successful. So there are all these options.
So what are the timelines like here? Because I'm guessing most of that's not on the market.
No, none of that's on the market. I think the fastest thing will be the Plan B Vasol gel, if that comes through. And that might be 2 years in the future. I think the testosterone gel for your shoulder will be maybe 5 years. So it's not, it's taken a long, long time. And also in those studies of men previously, because we've successfully had pills that stopped, made men infertile. But previously, the side effects in men were considered to be very, very important because you couldn't compare them to the risk of pregnancy because they weren't. So in women, the side effects were compared against a massive risk of pregnancy, and you can die in pregnancy. All sorts of things could happen. So it was more evenly balanced. Whereas the side effects in men are just a problem, and they are counted in a kind of different scientific way. So there's an attempt to change that and get it to be considered a joint responsibility. Mm-hmm. So you can consider the fact that a man feels a little bit headachy one day. But that compares to him not getting pregnant as a sort of family. And that's slightly different. But science has not caught up with life yet. No.
Yeah. And we started by talking about the fact that abortion rates had gone up.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's really important that we talk much more openly about abortions?
Well, because of what's happening in America for a start, which is, in things like Florida, there's going to be a ban at 6 weeks, on abortion. And you read these stories in America and you want to cry. It's just horrendous what's happening to women having, in terms of everything, in terms of incest. But I just think abortion, you can look at the most extreme cases and say, oh, my God, a 12-year-old has been raped. But even in the most ordinary cases, abortion should be part of our health care. And I feel that really strongly. I've had 2 abortions myself. I've got 3 children as well. And that worked out within my life to be the right thing for me. And, I had abortions because contraception failed me. And I wasn't on hormonal contraception. I was on then a diaphragm, which was just, rubbish eventually after a while. But, it just seems so wrong that we don't talk about it. And I love that, I love the story of France in the 1960s when over 300 really famous women, including kind of actresses like Catherine Deneuve and Simone de Beauvoir, all came out and said, we have had illegal abortions and we are all going to talk about them. We need to change abortion law in France. And then, a couple of years later, it did change. And I feel that, obviously an abortion, it's painful, it's difficult, it's complicated, it's different for everybody. And for some people, it's a huge trauma. And for other people, it's sort of a contraception gone wrong thing. It really, really varies, and we've got to be massively sensitive to that. But I feel that, I felt like I'm interviewing all these people. I have to be honest about what happened to me in this book. And I will be totally honest about my own abortions. And I think if every single person, who feels strong enough to say that, says that, then we'll all feel less crap about it, and we'll all feel more confident, and we'll all understand how it works and what it feels like and what the abortion pill feels like. And, that's not discussed enough. And we need to know what is going to happen to us, and that it happens to a third of women. So it's not weird, it's not surprising, it's part of our healthcare.
Well, Kate, it's been such a pleasure to chat about this book. It is honestly, I kept stopping. I have so many screenshots on my phone of this PDF, I cannot even tell you. I can't wait for everyone to listen to it and read it. It's really fantastic.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for telling your story too.